Before I begin, I have to speak about my political commitment. In Stockton, some days ago, there wasn't any published report on the news, but the Stockton Record, above all, I don't know how Fox News got into this, covered the event. This isn't poetry, but it is poetry. And I'll have to tell you it in Spanish. One chant was heard over and over. Obama, escuche, estamos en la lucha. Obama, presidente, escuche, estamos en la lucha. For those of you who don't know what Spanish means. Listen, Mr. President, we're in the struggle. I think that speaks for itself. That had to be my preface, because I'm in the struggle, along with the memory of my comandante, who is Che Guevara. It continues to be so. Message for May the 26th, reading at Bose. As I told the young poet Kristen Prevalet during one of our phone conversations some years ago, Wallace Stevens, in his appendix to the opus posthumous called Adagia, expressed the view that French and English, quote, French and English constitute a single language. This may certainly startle some Frenchmen and women, as well as those of the English-speaking world. The foundation lies in the essential Romance roots of both languages, but given the fact English, at its core, remains a Germanic base, evolved from Anglo-Saxon, but definitely influenced by Norman French in the Middle Ages. This certainly was of no help for me in my youthful struggles with the English language. But like James Joyce, who regarded English as a colonized language imposed upon his Irish ancestors, I had to make do with what I had. I wasn't living in Paris of the year 1924. I was in America, growing up in the mid-20th century, albeit always with the same sense of being in exile, as my immigrant grandparents had themselves never mastered the English language. The languages of our Mediterranean inheritance being Arabic, Byzantine Greek, ancient Ethiopian, Cappadocian, or ancient Armenian, Norman French, Provençal, now like Latin language, a dead language, Sicilian, and modern day Italian. I know amongst our Middle Eastern lineage, I most likely skip past Akkadian and Phoenician, lingua franca of ancient Lebanon. But be it as it may, this is not an apology for the so-called language school of American poets, which is at best apocryphal in my opinion. I am, after all, as I declared myself more than 40 years ago, still a French surrealist, who happens to write in English and occasionally in French, who considers the unseen poetry, the yet unwritten poetry, as the poetry of consequence in the world, as opposed to what the critics of this or that school proclaim or disclaim. I still consider the vast majority of my works as écriture automatique, or automatic writing, or as Baudelaire once declaimed, il y a dicté, that is, it's dictated, or the work flows through me. I'm always fond of that image of Orphée in Jean Cocteau's great film, in which the poet turns on the radio to hear what verses he is to be transcribing for that particular day. For those of you who are familiar, any familiar with that film, Orphée?
L'oiseau chante avec ses doigts.
It's the greatest, probably the greatest film ever made, in my humble opinion.
Un seul verre d'eau éclaire le monde. 3 fois.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Okay. All right. So I'm always fond of the image of Orphée in Jean Cocteau's great film, in which the poet turns on the radio to hear what verses are to be transcribed by him each day. That radio, so to speak, is inside me. The great unknown placed in there within me, so I tune within it each day, or when I am able, to find out what structures will come forth on either verse or so-called prose. Now I use these words, but for me, as it was for my French surrealist compères, the difference between poetry and prose is really a matter of intensity, rather than form or the traditional sense. One can open my friend Eleni Siciliano, her book, The Body Clock, published by Coffee House Press a few weeks ago, or a few years ago, to see this meeting of poetry and prose. And though she certainly isn't a surrealist, this great young American poet exemplifies what I mean by the foregoing view. Poetry flowing into prose, prose flowing into poetry to make the corpus of her book. There are also dream segments and collage to accompany or amplify the text of Body Clock. That's what you saw with Andy, what he did earlier. That's part of what I'm speaking about. An interposed word here about Coffee House Press. Coffee House Press is a successor to my friend Lita Hornick's New York art and groundbreaking publishing venture Culture. Coffee House continues the heritage of beautiful books and keeping the integrity of the poet. And for those of you who have been keeping abreast of what's been going on, people keep talking about the fact that the real book is now in danger of going away, going on with all this technological shit that they're talking about, putting books on technological objects, which I think is absolutely reprehensible. The New York group of poets and artists was how I made my public debut in America, and this is the same atmosphere in which I find Eleni's work emanates. I find her most compatible to my views on poetry. I should also say her name, which in Greek means the Sicilian, comes from her paternal grandfather, Angelo Sicilianus, who was my very important spiritual mentor. I read him partly in Greek and in English. His English translations are extremely rare at this time. Now to my book, Envoy, which is being debuted here this evening. It is not a series of selected works, but a book unto itself. It took a number of years to formulate itself and made its round of publishers who couldn't make head or tail out of it until it reached the desk of my friend Richard Owens, through our mutual friend Dale Smith and Wa Nguyen, who had published my selected works in 2002. Richard has become a lifelong friend, as are Dale and Wa, a major poet he is, for those he didn't speak about any of his writings, but you just go to his website and you can see his books, okay? Richard's become a lifelong friend, as are Dale and Waugh, major poet. He's a major poet as well as a publisher. And my thanks for making the book a work of art. That's what he's committed to. He makes books as works of art. And that's what you guys need to be centered upon, because we're dealing with all of this crap about Google making all of this Kindle and whatnot, and I hate it. I absolutely abhor it. But Richard is involved with the work of art, of making books. And that's most important. I urge you to find out more about the books that he's already published. So, thank you, Richard, for making the book as a work of art. And all that Richard has published has been a work of art. I am proud to be established and associated with Punch Press, which is Richard's book publishing house, and also the actual well, it comes out I think every 2 or 3 times a year, Damn the Caesars Review. Both creations of Richard Owen's genius as a poet and as a publisher. Both holds the art of the book. And I tell you again, the art of the book, the real book, the book that you hold in your hand as a work of art. In our technological, computerized world, with its bloodless and heartless publications masquerading as books for public consumption. I have a website, but I don't have a computer. The website was continuously funded by one of my literary fans, the CEO of TrainWeb.com, Ray Burns, since 1996. Again, I am grateful to my friend Ray for doing this. A word about my biography in Wikipedia. It is inaccurate and needs updating. My proclaiming I was a spokesman for surrealism in the United States of America was intended as a ruse. It has served its function and should be deleted from the article, as should be my claim to making innovations in theology according to surrealist principles. I am told this can be done, but that I need someone to adjust this for me on that site. Someone versed in computer literacy. I remain a computer illiterate proudly, along with the tribesmen of Borneo and the blue men of Morocco, alongside the great French poet and friend of mine, Jean-Paul Guibert, another one who has mastered the art of the book and a successor to the Romantics and the predecessor of the French surrealist poets. His work is thus far not translated into English to my knowledge, and he and his wife send me their fine publications each year. It is always a very special event to receive these wonderful works sent to me from Lucy-Saullion in central France, where Guibert and his artist wife, Danielle Caligari, have sought refuge from the computerized and technologicalized world that has engulfed us both in Europe and in America, as well as the rest of the world. Now this world of which we speak has many blessings as well as curses. I choose to keep my distance from its application. Pens, pencils, notebook, typewriter, manual 1945, Smith Corona are the means of my art. A word processor, model 1984, is no longer operational. I am quite addicted to it, as it were to TV, as perhaps many of my poems will betray. I continually voice the opinion of the Tsar Peter the Great, who proclaimed St. Petersburg was his window on the West. So television is my window on the world. It has been an inestimable influence, if you will, on my poetical career, beginning with the TV programs Omnibus, Camera 3, Walter Cronkite's, You Are There, and Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concerts, and yes, Captain Video. And Buster Crabbe's portrayal of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers in those Saturday afternoon serials of the early 1950s. I owe much to cowboy movies also. Bob Steele, Hoot Gibson, and the inimitable Lone Ranger and Tonto. They're a part of the Americana I love. Crazy Cat and Felix the Cat meant more to me as poetry than any of the English poetical works I was forced to read and interpret in school. They still occupy the same position in my affection as opposed to writing being done today by my so-called contemporaries. A good part of my book, Envoy, I owe to my friendship with the French poet, originally with the French surrealist, the second wave of the 1940s, the Afro-French poet Léopold Sédar Senghor, who eventually became the president of the former French Senegal. And then in his 80s was the first black poet to be admitted to the Académie Française. Now I take issue with the whole notion of Académie Française, but not with this honor bestowed upon my friend who influenced me so much with his philosophy of négritude and civilisation of the universal. Here my debt also, although not mentioned in Envoy, to Aimé Césaire, who passed away a few years ago at age 91 and was given tribute by, of all people, Sarkozy of France. Irony pervades the world we inhabit in the 21st century. I have said more than enough. I leave you with the book Envoy to take you wheresoever it will. Bon chance et bon voyage. And I read a selection. Now, I want to read, before I even read from Envoy, Du Témoignage, two tributes. The first tribute is for my friend Camille Norton, the poet. Votre âme, sauvant l'Empire, St. John Paris, chant pour l'âme à l'équinoxe. Here with the 5 kittens and my 2 cats, I preside over chaos in this cave. Un voix, un chant, un cri, without the final E, which I usually misplace. The heart of all Russian music contained in Kamarinskaya by Glinka, in the gift of my granddaughter Maya's purse. The cartoon bunny inside proclaims, sorry, forgot these eggs for you at Easter. Les bras au ciel, on ne peut discuter avec vous. Again, the price of gold up at 1,157.11 on the market today. A lone man's sport sock left on the side of the road. Africa of the Queen of Sheba survives only in the ruins of Meroe. I still wear virtually the same garb as that of the Garibaldini in Spain, circa 1938. The date that turned history on its head. Atroce primavera, hideous spring, wrote the poet in his opere. The jalapeno peppers spring up by themselves, hop and slide into my produce bag. Les jours les plus lumineux par l'amour, the day made the more luminous by love. The notes to this section. The 5 kiddies refer to Harriet, Alice, Aram, Jacques, and Youssef the Screamer. All born 17th of March, year 2010, to Esmeralda Kitty. 2 cats, Gigi Kitty and Esmeralda Kitty. The price of gold, as well as diamonds, extracted from the earth at the cost of blood, sweat, and tears. Meroe, ancient African kingdom, once located in Sudan. At this writing, Meroitic script has not yet been deciphered. The poet Lorenzo Colleggero, who spoke about Atroce Primavera. Calogero was acclaimed in 1960, the poet, the year of his death, as the Dylan Thomas of Italy by Rai, Radiodiffusione Italiana. The second part of Les Douze Témoignages. For a young woman who lived in Macedonia in her childhood, to Miss Christina Wadsworth. Et devant toi, les vagues brisants des blés sous les versants des terres hautes. Quote is from Senghor, the letters that led to hivernage. And how did the wind translate your hair into its demean, and the echoes of your boots as they trudged the snow on explorations into the mountains? How were they retained? I too was dreaming then, but I saw not your vision as I see it now unfold before me. El camino de nostra vita, on the journey to where we are going. In the time it takes me to inscribe but one line of verse, to the place where the young Alexander received and trained his steed Bucephalus, to repair this human brokenness in the silence. Garib, stranger in Arabic, the roads will blossom, multiplying. No longer do I travel the linear steps of the Stagirite, but by the broken compass of Comandante Che Guevara. To live then, en voyage, becomes a voyage without frontiers, lest I go into the pit, l'abîme, in the non sequitur of the mirror. Nelson Mandela, you are our revivifier. If you speak of holiness, I find it. O starets, O sadhus, only in my holy socks. As an inconnu, an unknown, I'm ever the transient, boarding the bus with a shopping bag, yet the gift remains rustling waves of wheat on the highland slopes. The notes, the Stagirite refers to Aristoteles, 384 to 322 BC, whose birthplace was in Stagira, now located in eastern Macedonia. Che, Ernesto Che Guevara, with Fidel, one of the revolutionary liberators of Cuba in 1958. Extending his Marxist vision of world revolution, Che proclaimed his message to the Tricontinental while conducting guerrilla operations in Bolivia. In 1967, the message to the Tricontinental was published as a pamphlet in Havana, Cuba, in the month before Che's capture by Bolivian and American CIA fascists and executed at Villa Grande, Bolivia. Further notes, starets comes from the old Slavonic starets. It's written in Cyrillic, which you won't see here. A holy man or a monk of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The sadhus comes from the Eastern Indian ascetics, the holy men. The derivation is in Sanskrit, sadhu. Okay, I will read some selections from the work, the envoy. My alternité, agoraphobic reflection. I have a particular disorder, which is called agoraphobic disorder, and so the work is entitled My Autorité in French, agoraphobic reflection. It's dedicated to Annie Brisset, who is in Quebec. Words, les mots, come into being at the dawn of humanity, most likely with that anonymous, primitive inventor of language in a crisis of some sort or another, les mots, crise, l'impasse. Crise, les moments décisifs. I dust off the page where Heidegger says the poet is the shepherd of language, of being. In the letter on humanism. And as equally seminal is the discovery of fire. It was somehow on the banks of the Nile, African ancestors discovered papyrus. And this predecessor of paper, could be used to record words, transcripting their symbols or glyphs that would later appear as writing. I gaze at the paper set before me today. It is blank, waiting to meet with its first recorded words of the day. On such a blank piece of paper, Dostoevsky first also fixed his gaze, preparing to write the first words of conversations and exhortations of Father Zosima in the chapter The Russian Monk of the Brothers Karamazov. That contained the notes Mozart set down for the last of the symphonic works of the 41st or the Jupiter Symphony. The paper Picasso Picasso coveted during the dark years of Paris, 1941-1944, during the occupation. The whole of human existence still continues as a crisis, increase, out of which crisis, cries across the world. With its innumerable time zones, Russia itself has some 20 or more. The hum of words continuing on relentlessly, ceaselessly, Uzbek, Uyghur, French, Wolof, Armenian, Brazilian, Portuguese, Corsican, Brooklynese, as well as English, circle our planet like the multicultural rings of Saturn. Cries of victory or of defeat, marriage proposals, words of Martin Luther King, still there in the atmosphere, bombarded by static and white noise hymns sung in Appalachia, screaming headlines of newspapers, hawking of the marketplace, sale of human lives at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, words of lovers spoken in secret or sent via letters. First words of a child, my grandson's own, or those of my granddaughter, Maya, or those of Keaton and Goya and Smith, heard by his parents in Austin, Texas, both poets. Silent words upon a page to be transcribed into books. And always, as Mallarmé said, all the world exists to be made into a book. Sommaire, vos qui tout au monde existe pour aboutir un livre. Again, I opened the pages of Camus' Carnet, January 1942, March 1951. At random, au hasard, objectif, I cannot believe what it is I read. Camus is reading Ignatius Loyola, of all things, and the passage I come upon is that he denotes the following. Loyola, the human race, those men in a body moving toward hell. Page 269. Rauschenberg's iconic litho of gas-masked police marching as in a Roman phalanx in the process of breaking up anti-war demonstrators, Chicago, 1968. In the meantime, cold, fog outside. As I write you, chère Mademoiselle Marie Bouffier de la Bourgogne arrived here in the States only in a matter of months. French consulate, San Francisco. War, the monster of war, slips its snout through the cold and fog. Through the crack in the door, I immediately grab for my kitchen knife and lop it off. What better use for an instrument, as I am a vegetarian? But I know the beast, la bête de la guerre, will only grow another ugly snout in but a matter of moments. But for the moment, adjoindre le deux bout, $17.23 until the 31st of January. I wonder how François Villon, see his song of the scaffold, ever bought groceries in his day. As you arrive at the door of the French Consul General, San Francisco, your voice in the fog replicates. I receive its echo here. Again, its sound waves ripple invisibly in the silver mesh of poetry to become mon encre, the silver ink in which I write in the silence. And here I send you the words of patron saint, bottom of a midsummer night's dream. Every man look over his part, for the short and the long is our play, is preferred. In any case, let this be, have clean linen, and let not him that plays the lion pare his nails, for they shall hang out the lion's claws. And most dear actors, eat no onions, no garlic, for we are to utter sweet breath, and I do not doubt but to hear them say, it is a sweet comedy. No more words. Away, go away, exeunt. Témoignage à Senghor. This is work written for my friend, Leopold Sédar Senghor, who died at, I guess he was 98 years old, a great French poet and part of the French Surrealist group. Originated the concept of négritude, which is the resurgence of people of African ancestry to rise up and recognize their imaginative power in poetry and literature. So, start with epigraphs from his correspondence to me. We were great friends. Dakar, 9th of April, 1969. Bien reçu votre lettre qui m'a beaucoup ému. Bien sûr, j'ai subi l'influence du survie, mais la vérité, très peu, car les nègres est par nature surréaliste. This is a letter from the poet Senghor, which I translate. Received your letter, was much moved by it. To be sure, I have acknowledged the influence of surrealism upon me, but only to the extent that the person of black ancestry is in himself quite innately surrealist. Translated from the French by myself. Une proposition qui émane de moi, que tout au monde existe abouti en livre. This comes from Stepan Mallarmé, and it's pretty much a motto of mine. If I can say, translate it, if I can say, a proposition which has emanated from myself to the effect that everything in the world exists to culminate in a book. It's a translation from the original French of Mallarmé. I am greedy, even with the last few moments of daylight at dusk. Had your name not been disclosed to me, I should have known what it means to live in a world without hope, l'espoir, without the light from your torch, my pèlerinage, my journey, my hajj, that's Arabic, would never have been impeded by some 200 or more years. I have never really learned to play cards. All my earliest attempts at games were the butt of jokes by my Purulite companions, who would have called the Plains Indians of the American West white eyes, and also the phrase of my grandmother, which I recall from my boyhood, referring to that race amongst whom we had settled that prided itself on the superiority, those whom she called ghost faces. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. I do not know why that saying comes to mind, but it does. I feel you would be its best interpreter, as you had stored within yourself so many of the world's worst follies as to undo the sage Democritus in search for but one honest man. No, the work goes on for quite some time, and you can all read it in Envoy. You're going to, it's not a pitch to purchase the book, but you can read it in there. I'm not going to bore you with more things, but there are a couple of more things that I will read.
They will be boring.
That you might be bored. If you want to be bored, you can leave. This is called Variation. This is a new work. This is not an envoy. It's called Variations on As You Leave the Room. The epigraph is such from Senghor again, and I translated. I won't give you the French. It's English. The rhythmic silence cradles us, and this comes from Senghor's Chant d'Ombre, or Shadow Songs. The ruble's not doing much these days, as Dr. Andrew Weil says. Turn off the news at dinner time and knock at the door. Two young women, hello, we're missionaries. I trip over the garbage pail. Don Quixote's lance yet points toward the horizon. And the multitudes that followed before and after the oft-reported cry. It's amazing how Friday creeps up on you, long preserved in a vault under the temple of Jupiter. Mrs. Siddons, in a silk dress and big picture hat, looks young, vivacious, et charmant. Moreau de Maupertuis. Everyone knows that in the southern clime there is an unknown space. I am reminded each time I pass your photo, the one with the side view resemblance to Nefertiti, that it somehow, at eye level, is always in need of straightening. We all have our peculiar habits. Edad, siècle, bloom of the almond tree, end of April, where before there was nothing in the letter I haven't as yet composed. I remind you that Che and Fidel remain the only heroes worthy of the name in our atmosphere, in our hemisphere, along with the mutineers of the Amistad, who reversed course for the New York harbor. 12:30 a.m., awakened from my dream where raucous tea party people are buried in a time capsule along with late-night live TV comedians. I've left dishes to soak overnight. A miniature mermaid floats and swims in the tub of suds in the sink. On this occasion, a caravan bearing frankincense from Yemen makes its way through the viscous walls of my room, and thus rendered autotelic. Attired in my usual get-up, trudging about like a homeless person, I doubt as to whether Immanuel Kant has any opinions in this matter. I'm going to read you something that was written in 1971, a poem dedicated to my friend Bill Bergson. It's called The Last New York Poem for Bill Bergson. My flashy red tie, my friends say, always precedes me when I enter a room, is nostalgic about New York. It's a problem to live in a rural area and still write about New York. And even if New York disintegrates, there will always be New York in my tie. But else, what else is there besides New York? I'm like a fisherman telling the fish a fish tale. It's best to love New York when you're out of New York. Maybe. Hi, good morning. There's a whole New York construction company in Mai Tai. The cement mixers are in Mai Tai. Frank O'Hara is in Mai Tai. Gibraltar Life Insurance is in Mai Tai, along with Fifth Avenue and its workmen and First Nighting. It's written sometime 1971. That was written in 1971. This is a very late work. It's called Poème Perdu, which means in French, lost poem. I bring with me those borders you have not heard of, that are long gone, places where I have died, in battles no longer remembered. Jarama, the Ebro, my kiss remains on the garment of her whom I have loved. Here the shadows accumulate in the sun of the new day, where I begin as an ignoramus devoid. Thank you.